All right, today we are diving into one of the most pivotal moments in modern history. We're talking about the final chaotic weeks of World War II in Europe and how a truly devastating end became a brand new and very complicated beginning. So let's start right there with the words of someone who actually lived through it. I mean, just try to imagine that for a second. After 6 solid years of noise, sirens, bombs, marching boots, all of a sudden, there's just silence. That silence was peace. And for millions, it was something so unreal, so deeply dreamed of, that its arrival was almost too much to even process. But, getting to that peace, even just on paper, wasn't some single, clean moment. Oh no. It was messy, it was fractured, and it really started to show the deep cracks between the Allies that will go on to define the entire post-war world. This timeline really shows you just how tense this all was. It wasn't a one-and-done deal. You see, Colonel General Jodl, he actually tried to negotiate a separate surrender just to the Western Allies so they could keep fighting the Soviets. But Eisenhower's people were having none of it. They were firm. It had to be an unconditional surrender on all fronts, period. And even after they finally got that signature, the political games were just getting started. And here's why. When Stalin got word of the surrender signed in France, he absolutely lost it. He was furious. He felt completely sidelined, like his general was just treated as some random observer. So what does he do? He demands a second, definitive surrender ceremony, this time in Berlin, the very heart of the territory he had conquered. This was a total power play, a really clear sign of the political fault lines that were already splitting the Allies apart. So while the politicians and generals are arguing over who signs what where, what did this so-called peace actually feel like for the people on the ground? Let's get into the chaotic and often contradictory human reality of it all. For the average German, the end of the war wasn't some simple sigh of relief. Not at all. It was this complex storm of emotions, where the feeling of being liberated crashed right into the feeling of being utterly defeated. And this is the absolute key to understanding the mindset at the time. Many Germans experienced what they called a double feeling. On the one hand, you have this deep national humiliation of total defeat. But on the other hand, there's this profound, incredibly personal sense of relief. You survived. You were free from the Nazi tyranny. How do you even begin to reconcile those two things at the same time? And you can see this clash of feelings, clear as day, right at the border. In cities like Pilsen, you had liberated Czechs just exploding with joy, welcoming American soldiers as heroes. At the exact same time, you have defeated Germans being marched out of that same town, facing nothing but contempt and often violent revenge for years of brutal occupation. Two totally different worlds, side by side. This diary entry just captures the sheer desperation perfectly. For thousands upon thousands of German soldiers, the only goal was to disappear. That uniform that once meant power was now a massive target on your back. And civilian clothes, they became the most valuable currency you could imagine. I mean, think about it. 450 cigarettes for an old pair of pants. A full suit could get you pounds of sausage and cash. It was all about shedding that past and just melting away into the chaos. And beyond all that psychological turmoil, the physical reality was, well, it was almost total annihilation. The landscape of Germany's great cities was a wasteland that pretty much defied description. Just take a second to let that number sink in. 50,000 tons of explosives on Berlin alone. A British air marshal looked at the city and called it a desert of rubble, a place that was completely dead. He honestly suggested it could never be rebuilt. This quote just perfectly captures that feeling. For the writer Hans-Erich Nossack, when he looked at the ruins of his hometown Hamburg, the feeling wasn't even grief anymore. It was a sense of complete unreality. The destruction was so total, so absolute, that his mind couldn't even process it. It was simply incomprehensible. And yet, and this is incredible, out of those very ruins, this powerful symbol of resilience emerged, the Trümmerfrauen, the rubble women. With millions of German men dead or in prison camps, it was the women who took over the cities. They took on the back-breaking, seemingly impossible job of clearing the rubble, brick by brick, becoming the very first architects of their country's recovery. So, right in the middle of all this devastation, the victorious powers, the Big Three, they all meet just outside Berlin. Their goal? To decide the future, not just of Germany, but of the entire world. And as the victors sat down at Potsdam, they faced this massive choice, which you can see laid out right here. Should they go with Treasury Secretary Morgenthau's plan and punish Germany, turn it into a weak agricultural state with no industry? Or should they follow Secretary of War Stimson's advice and rebuild it, arguing that you could never have a stable Europe without a strong German economy? Punishment or reconstruction? In the end, Stimson's vision of reconstruction pretty much won the day. They hammered out the Potsdam Agreement, which became the framework for the future. Germany would be kept whole, but it would be completely disarmed. Its leaders would be put on trial for war crimes, it would have to pay reparations, and its eastern borders were going to be redrawn. But there was this monumental secret hanging over the entire conference, a secret that completely changed the balance of power on the planet. Right as the talks began, President Truman gets a coded message. The atomic bomb test in New Mexico? It worked. A new, terrifying age had just begun, and for a moment, he was the only man in that room who knew it. And that brings us to our final and honestly kind of chilling thought. It comes straight from the man at the center of it all, President Truman, written in his diary right after he'd seen the ruins of Berlin and learned about his new world-ending weapon. It's an observation that just perfectly captures the deep, deep anxiety of this strange new dawn. That was the fundamental question they were grappling with in the rubble of 1945. And, if you think about it, it's a question that still echoes, maybe louder than ever, for all of us today. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.